Welcome to Cineights, where you get to know the best movies and series. Today's video is about the best World War I movies of all time. I hope you enjoy this video. Be sure to watch until the end because I'm sure you will like it. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. They Shall Not Grow Old 2018, not just a violent crucible but also a petri dish for technological, medical and social leaps. The First World War is still indirectly fueling innovation a century later. Peter Jackson's sui generis documentary joins 1917 in reinventing the grammar of war films, painstakingly colorizing reams of archive footage and adding the sounds of the war, including the actual voices of veterans, to create a truly haunting immediacy. Hearing some of the soldiers recalling their sadness when the armistice finally came is a useful reminder that the experience of war was far from homogeneous. It's an incredible film in the way it brings the archives to life, and it's so powerful for featuring the recordings of the veterans. It shocked me to the core to hear the voices of men who'd been dead for 30 years that I'd once interviewed. Anyone with even a passing interest in the war should see it. Journey's End 2018, frequently revived as a stage play, R.C. Sherriff's claustrophobic and nail-gnawingly tense snapshot of a British dugout on the eve of the German spring offensive of 1918 isn't immediately cinematic. But The Duchess, director Saul Dibbs's adaptation, unlike the 1930 James Whale version, uses nimble camera work and imaginative framing to expand the canvas and deliver a powerful human drama of doomed men in the subterranean world of the trenches. Strung out over a thin khaki line, the British Army is about to be battered, and this small but richly drawn platoon is at the sharpest end of it. It depicts what, to me, is that essential moment on the eve of battle. A great storm is coming, and the men all sense it. Also shows how the officers in an infantry company lived and worked and fought and existed with each other, written by a veteran, which gives it that extra level of credibility. Gallipoli 1981. Peter Weir's view of the debacle at Gallipoli follows young Anzac soldier Archie Hamilton and his fellow Aussie Frank Dunn from the farmlands of Western Australia to training in Egypt, and from there to the scrubby, bloody crags of Turkey and the costly battles of Lone Pine and the Neck. It's a story of mateship and camaraderie, as well as a defining cinematic expression of Australian nationhood, and Weir freights it all with humanity without sparing us an iota of the hellishness. The final shot is an all-timer, too. This film had a massive effect on me when I first saw it. It's got a lot of historical issues. The British role at the Neck is wrong, and understandably. There's a lot of Aussie stereotypes of palms, but it's an incredibly good depiction of trench warfare at Gallipoli. All Quiet on the Western Front 2022, the most recent World War I film, breaks new ground by offering a widescreen German perspective with incredible detail and accuracy, something rarely seen since G.W. Pabst's West Front 1918. Unlike the 1930 Hollywood adaptation of war veteran Erich Maria Remarque's novel, this one boasts a German cast. The battle scenes are huge, the violence is unsparing, and newcomer Felix Kammerer perfectly embodies conscript Paul Baumer's descent from bright-eyed youth to hollowed-out veteran. It's on a completely different level of detail and believability, right down to the soldiers' bloodshot eyes caused by the concussion of explosions. It really captures the experience of trench warfare in the latter part of the war. Wooden Crosses 1932, the finest French perspective of the Great War is this adaptation of former soldier Roland Dorgal's novel about infantrymen on the front line in Champagne. Once hard to find, it's been recently restored, and deservedly so. A Gallic All Quiet on the Western Front, only with a harder edge, it charts a dwindling regiment's travails, and especially those of young law student Damaki. Director Raymond Bernard got Pathé's new sound department to recreate the noise of battle. Filming took place on the old battlefields themselves, and the cast comprised entirely of veterans. As one of them, Charles Vanel, later noted, "We didn't have to act, we just had to remember." It's important that many of these films portray the war between the French and Germans, because on most of the front and for most of the war, it was between France and Germany. Wooden Crosses really captures the disillusionment of the interwar years. 1917, 2020, a war film made with all the latest technical wizardry and some help from legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins. 1917 is a story of courage and duty set in a very specific historical moment, the sudden retreat of the German army to the Hindenburg Line in the penultimate year of the war. It creates a vast liminal space for the film to explore with its one-shot device, a haunted landscape straight out of an eerie horror film. Tommy runners must navigate it to save a battalion from slaughter. Sam Mendes's grandfather served in the trenches as a runner, making this a very personal tribute from the filmmaker. Veterans I interviewed would talk about the randomness of death, how someone could be left unscathed by a burst of machine gun fire that would kill the guy on his left and right, and that comes across strongly in 1917. It shows an open landscape with shallow chalk trenches. I'll say, no, the war wasn't like that, but that's exactly what it was. Aces High 1976, cleverly transplanting R.C. Sherriff's Journey's End from the trenches to the skies above in Bloody April 1917, and ramping up the cynicism by several degrees. Aces High is a simultaneously thrilling and fatalistic depiction of air combat in the war. Malcolm McDowell stars as a hard-boozing Royal Flying Corps ace who is hero-worshipped by the young pilot whose sister he's dating and is slowly crushed by the burden of trying to keep him safe. As safe as it's possible to be in a highly flammable wooden biplane with no parachute. Reflects the experience of pilots in the First World War, the fear and pressure of flying aircraft they couldn't escape from. There were no parachutes. I interviewed two men who'd been pilots in the war, and one carried a pistol and one carried cyanide, because they'd seen men go down in flames or jump out at 10,000 feet. All Quiet on the Western Front 1930, famously hated by the Nazis, who released mice into cinemas that screened it. Lewis Milestone's Best Picture winner remains an extraordinary film about loss of innocence under fire. Its German soldiers are played by American actors, including Lou Ayres as Paul Baumer, and there's a strange early dissonance in trying to tally the accents with the uniforms. But the unsparing depiction of combat in all its brutality is still confronting. A soldier's severed hands clinging to barbed wire is just one moment that sears itself into your mind. Its depiction of the war, only a dozen years after it ended, is extraordinary. Conventional view of it, of smiling Tommies and German soldiers going to the trenches to find glory, was being challenged at the time, and this film was a big part of that. Attacks and counterattacks and the depiction of trench warfare are very accurate. The cast had fought in the war. King and Country 1964, a bit like the episode of Blackadder Goes Forth where Captain Blackadder is put on trial for eating General Melchet's favorite carrier pigeon, only absolutely not a comedy. This brooding, angry 60s war film is a late British New Wave take on hierarchy, control and shell shock in the trenches. It also lays bare an important but lesser-told Great War story in following a private as he's put on trial for desertion and faced with a firing squad at Passchendaele. Bogart plays the increasingly sympathetic officer assigned to defend him. The result is Britain's answer to Paths of Glory. For a long time, it wasn't really well known that British soldiers had been shot in the First World War, and this film opened a door to our understanding of it. Johnny Got His Gun 1971. Even though most WW1 movies show the conflict in all its horror and unquestionable terror, Johnny Got His Gun is particularly brutal and hard to watch. It follows a young soldier who's horrifically injured right at the end of WW1, and finds himself in a hospital bed without his arms and legs, and is unable to hear, see, taste, or smell anything, too. What he does have are his traumatic memories from fighting, which the audience is shown as he lies in bed, unable to move or communicate with anyone else. It's such a bleak and distressing movie, but is difficult to stomach by design, as it aims to show the worst possible outcome faced by someone injured in a war. The African Queen 1951. The African Queen is set in Africa during the start of WW1, though ultimately ends up being more of an adventure film than a war film. It pairs together Hollywood legends Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, and centers on a drunken riverboat captain who reluctantly agrees to take a missionary on a dangerous trip down a long river. Naturally, given the two are mismatched, a romance develops, but thankfully the quality of the acting makes it believable enough. And it does find time to have a few war-related sequences, particularly closer to the film's climax. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp 1943. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp is the rare war movie that's set during both World Wars. It was released while WW2 was still ongoing, and begins during that conflict. The film's protagonist, however, is a veteran soldier, and flashbacks reveal that he participated in WW1, with his experiences there heavily influencing the direction of his life between the two major wars. Narratively, it's quite complex for a movie that's 80 years old, and arguably qualifies as an epic, standing at 163 minutes long. Thankfully, it's aged fantastically well, and still stands as a great movie that combines several genres, including war, historical drama, and romance, in interesting ways. Wings 1927. Wings is a movie that shows war films have always been popular and influential, as it was the winner of the very first Best Picture Oscar of all time. It centers on two fighter pilots during WW1 who both love the same woman, therefore dealing with violent conflict in the skies and emotional turmoil on the ground. It's a silent film, and as such, does admittedly feel dated and like it's from another time. However, getting past the barrier of watching a silent movie reveals a movie that's still quite remarkable to this day, especially when it comes to aerial combat scenes. The romance stuff might be a little cheesy, but as a silent action movie, the dogfighting scenes really deliver and still hold up to this day.